Culture Shock and Acculturation. The source of this lecture is Geert Hofstede, Cultures and Organizations, Software of the Mind. The content of this video is: how do we feel in a new culture? Ethnocentrism and polycentrism, xenophobia and xenophilia, racism and minorities. How do we feel in a new culture? When we encounter a new culture, we go through some ups and downs of positive feelings and negative feelings, and they come in 4 phases. The first phase is the so-called euphoria, a positive fire. The second phase is the actual culture shock. The third phase, which might take a while, is the phase of acculturation, getting used to the culture. And the fourth phase is the so-called stable state, in which we stay after we have gone through the whole process. This whole process can take a couple of days, but for some people it takes weeks, months, or even years. When we encounter a new culture, we start from the positive side, euphoria, but it doesn't stay and the culture shock hits in. We experience negative feelings that are quite hard to deal with for some people, depending on how different the new culture is from what they have known before. The phase of acculturation is a gradual getting to know the culture, gaining new orientation, and the stable state might at best be with positive feelings towards the new culture, or neutral, or if not all difficulties can be managed too well, at a negative level. Euphoria, the first phase, is characterized by the excitement of traveling, leaving home. To see new countries, new buildings, a new landscape is fascinating at first. Curiosity carries you through your days, trying things out, making new experience. The discovery of new, also practical things is experienced as something positive. It is like a honeymoon. It's like falling in love with someone, building a relationship, and only seeing the positive. It's a lot of new experience, but in this phase, the new experience is something fascinating. And this is what changes in the second phase, in the culture shock. Real life starts. Honeymoon is over. Everything that is new can become overwhelming. It's feelings of distress, helplessness, being disoriented. You cannot tell the difference between toothpaste or shaving cream because you can't know the products and you're not used to them. The mental state of an infant is what many people say about the culture shock. You have to start all over again. The simplest things must be learned again. And there can be a certain amount of hostility towards the new culture simply because the culture shock causes so much distress. But it doesn't stay that way. In phase 3, the acculturation, we are getting used to the new environment. There is some more general orientation to places, to interaction with other people. Learning to function in the new environment is characteristic for the acculturation. Building new habits. The adoption of some local values can be quite agreeable, and also an increased self-confidence because one doesn't feel like a helpless infant anymore. The integration into a new social network is something very helpful for the acculturation. So in the fourth phase, it can be positive, neutral, or negative. And the stable state could be, if it's positive, it's like the immigrant or the person who has changed the culture has gone native, has fully adopted the habits, values, and orientation of the target culture. The identity is somewhat reconfigured. People often talk about a new life. The neutral stable state is that the person experiences him or herself as bicultural, and the identity has one new aspect. Negative would be it's worse than home, and the country of origin can be idealized. Overall, it's important to keep in mind that this process can take a long time, and the achievement of a positive or at least a neutral, stable state is something that doesn't have to be reached within the first couple of days or even months. Negative stable states can still turn, for instance, if the social network of a person improves greatly, or if new relationships or a spouse from the target culture comes into the life of the person. Now let's take a look at what happens if people from different cultures meet. Which conflicts can arise? Unhealthy for cooperation is ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is about who sets the standards for what is considered normal behavior, normal looks, normal food, whatever the standards are in a certain culture. We are the center of the universe. That's a typical way to express that a population or a person considers their own standards, their own cultural standards, as normal, and everything that comes from another culture or from another country is not considered normal but different or other. You can compare this on an individual level with egocentrism. People who judge the rest of the world only from their own point of view are egocentric. Normal is what this culture defines. That's ethnocentrism. The opposite of ethnocentrism, but it's also unhealthy, is polycentrism. Different people are measured by different standards, but there's not really a common ground. It's like we do it our way, they do it their way, but there is no common morale, there's no common ground for the participants of the different cultures. So it can result in multiculturality, but it can also result in parallel communities that are out of touch with each other. Fear or enthusiasm will also arise if people from different cultures meet. Xenophobia, xenos, that's a Greek word for the stranger. Phobia, that's fear, the fear of strangers, fear of foreigners and strangers. And there are strong stereotypes for a xenophobic person of who is foreign. There's a certain reluctance to interact with strangers, with people who are considered as not being from here. Xenophilia is the exact opposite. Xenos, again, that's the stranger. And the philia, that's like affiliation. You're friendly with people who are strangers. For instance, the notion that the foreigners do everything better. Polycentrism can result in xenophilia. The lack of balance is the problem. Neither one in itself is healthy. Racism. Racism is something that is socially learned. Racism can be based on xenophobia. So the fear of foreigners does not follow any plan. It's just a general fear of everything that doesn't look like me, myself, my family. Then there are exceptions, and mind you, this is a construction. Exceptions after getting to know people, like you are not a typical name, the name of any country. That's the exception that is constructed. Stereotypes are typical for xenophobia, stereotypes to reduce complexity. There can also be racism that is based on the fight about power, the supremacy of a race or of an ethnic group. The fight to maintain the imbalance of power is racist, or there is a negative discrimination and propaganda against certain people. So racism is socially learned. Minorities and migrants are often the target of racism, stereotypes, or discrimination in general. Let's look at some examples for minorities. Herero in Namibia, Tibetans next to China, the Polish in the US, Germans in Transylvania, Italians, Portuguese, Turks in Germany, Indians and Pakistanis in Britain, Sinti and Roma people. All these are examples of people who are a minority where they live or appear. Now let's look at this from a theoretical angle. Minorities include a wide variety of people. They can be the original populations overrun by immigrants, like the Herero in Namibia, who've been killed by Germans and other Europeans. Descendants of economical, political, or ethnic migrants or refugees, like many Polish who migrated to the US. Descendants of imported or migrant labor, like the many Turkish families who've been living in Germany for the third and fourth generation. Natives of former colonies, like Indians or Pakistanis from Great Britain, or international nomads, like for instance the Sinti and Roma, who are in nature traveling people who prefer a lifestyle that does not fix them to one special place. Refugees can become migrants, but migrants and refugees obviously are different groups of people. Refugees also include a wide variety. Refugees within their own country. Since the strong rainfall we had in Germany in July, we have refugees who fled their places and their broken homes and still live with friends and family because they cannot return until their houses have been rebuilt. Temporary refugees in neighbor countries, like the many Syrians who fled to Turkey and tried to make a living there. Refugees in flight, and by this I don't mean they're on a plane, they are fleeing. They are currently between countries, like the people who came to Belarus and tried to make their way towards Western Europe, or people in camps like Moira in Greece, or who are in hiding. Then we have asylum seekers in other countries, people who use a legal process to get granted that they can stay in the country they've reached. Or people who have already been granted asylum, and this generates a real group of migrants. These are the people who originally arrived as refugees but started to make a living here and now have the papers and the possibilities and make their living in Germany. Obviously, people from different cultures still have a lot in common. And if you'd like to ask me, I come from a German background. But part of my family is Swedish, part of my family comes from Namibia, and some part of my family lives in South Africa. So let's also look at what we have in common, despite I just...